Authenticity in action is something our next guests also share as a core value. Stephen Burks is one of the most recognized American industrial designers of his generation. He's consulted on product development with hundreds of artisans across the globe, through nonprofits like the Clinton Global Initiative, Aid to Artisans, Design Network Africa, among others. His partner, Malika Leiper, is a researcher, storyteller, and urban strategist. She was born and raised in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and received her master's in urban planning at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. The impressive duo is focused these days on how to engage in authentic design collaborations with artisans throughout the globe. And they believe their conclusions will create more opportunities for diversity in design. Stephen and Malika will be interviewed by my colleague, Fred Nicolas, the managing editor of Business of Home.
Hey.
Hi.
How's it going? Nice to see you guys.
Nice to see you.
Right.
Good to
Have
be
a seat.
here. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So we're going to be talking a lot about craft and artisans. Stephen, I want to start with you. It's interesting because when you went to high school, I remember you told me that you were really interested in Mies van der Rohe and Frank Lloyd Wright. So you're really into like the most modernist people.
Yeah, of course.
So when did you make a left turn and get into handcrafted goods and working with artisans?
I mean, growing up in Chicago, there's modern architecture everywhere.
Right.
And that was very inspirational to me. My work, I suppose, pivoted to craft maybe 15 years later, when I really started working professionally. I had been working in a way that I thought was very natural and just kind of being a designer. And then my identity was kind of was brought to my attention. And then I had to ask myself, is there another way of working? Can I create my own path? And is that path about kind of project that's more inclusive of other cultural perspectives?
What was the first one? Like what got it all started? Was there one product or collaboration?
Probably my first handcrafted object was the Missoni patchwork vases, collaboration with Missoni, the fashion brand, during the Milan Furniture Fair in the mid-noughts, let's say. And that project was for us very much about taking what skills that they were good at and the products that they were making and then reinventing it through a very simple technique.
Right. Malika, what about you? Do you have a past with craft? Was there like a first handmade object that really got you down this path?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up modernism because modernism was also very influential in my upbringing in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, where Van Molivan, our premier architect who studied under Le Corbusier, designed and built our city in the 1950s when we gained independence from the French. But my view of modernism was more from the lens of the limits of modernism and also, how styles, when they become recreated in certain places, they don't always fit and work.
Right.
But in terms of what craft objects really resonated with me growing up, it's textiles in Cambodia and also working in stone. I visited the temples of Angkor, which were built in sandstone and in laterite. So seeing the technique of my people and the handwork of my people was always very important for me.
Cool. So I'm going to ask kind of a blunt, stupid question, but are handmade objects better? Is craft better than like a machine-made, mass-produced? What makes it better, and who's it better for?
I mean, I try to steer away from these kind of
stupid questions like that.
No. Yeah. But just a binary way of looking at the world, right?
Yeah.
This is better than that, because if we look at craft as oppositional to industry, then we don't find room for collaboration. I tend to believe that there's more space in the gray for things to kind of come together and be about the future. A lot of our project is about taking these craft traditions and combining them with industry in order to find new opportunities for a future project or a new way of thinking about what was made by hand.
And I would add, too, that something Stephen's always said is that hands have power, and we believe in using the hands where they're most useful. And so a hand in collaboration with a machine together is where, the magic happens.
Right.
I mean, traditionally, if you look at industrial production, it's all about efficiency, right?
Right.
And the minute you touch something, things become more expensive.
Right.
And that's, something that we don't want to do. But we look at hands adding value to a process. So the more times we touch something, that we increase the value of the thing, as opposed to just making it more expensive to make.
Right, exactly. I'm curious if you guys can sort of pinpoint where we are with the popularity of this idea of craft being valuable in our society. It's interesting, I was thinking craft is such a thing, handmade is such a thing. Yeah. When I was getting ready for this interview, I was looking all around my apartment and I was like, I have one handmade object, which is kind of embarrassing because I'm a design editor, but it's interesting because it seems like a very important concept, but I feel like it hasn't really penetrated our broad consciousness. People aren't making choices based around handmade stuff. How do you guys feel about that?
It's pretty interesting that you could, spot that one handmade object.
Yeah.
What was the object? I'm curious.
Well, it was a hand-painted sign that I bought when I was in Morocco. And I love it. I mean, it's one of my favorite things I have, which is telling. And then, of course, everything else is just machine made. But I'm curious, are we at a moment? Are we at peak craft? Are we just at the beginning? Tell me about that.
It's kind of hard to say. I mean, we have to remember that the time we're living in is just like a blip on the radar in terms of all of the time that civilizations have existed on Earth, and how long,
on a big scale,
on a bigger scale, how long people have been making things by hand. And for us, craft is tied to society and culture, and I mean, all of our cities were actually made by hand at one point, right? And so. It's a little bit hard to say where we're at, but today craft has become a kind of marketing term where everything is handcrafted. Your sandwiches, handcrafted. And so you kind of have to wonder when we talk about craft, what do we actually mean? And for us, it's about going back to the origins of the word craft, and you could even reference techne, for example, the Greek description for how to do something, or a technique, or even a technology. Right. And those technologies don't age, right? I mean, there are traditional age-old ways of doing something, and if it still works, why not continue? And so if we think about, for us, the future of craft, it has to be in combination with new ways of living and new technologies and industry. And so the potential is exponential.
Yeah, it's interesting. It was funny that you said that everything is crafted and curated. I mean, it was funny. You talk so much about the power of the hand. Yeah. I was just thinking that I was reading a press release where it was talking about how this influencer had hand selected this color palette, and I was like, okay, so they went to Photoshop and the idea of the hand kind of doesn't mean what it used to mean. I want to get back to something you were just saying earlier, Stephen. There, we were talking about how you want the hand to add value, because I think a lot of designers will be watching this and they'll be thinking, okay, well, you have this beautiful handcrafted piece. It takes longer. It's probably more expensive. My client, is presented with this option or option B, which is faster and maybe cheaper. How can we? It's crafts, but how can we sell it? How can we make it more valuable to them?
I think we have to think about it on a much larger scale and get away from singular objects having to do all the work. Let's say. Okay. I mean, we really are interested in redesigning processes and systems. Mm-hmm. And so if we stop looking at individual objects and start to look at, okay, what is the underlying sort of path of development to arriving at that object, and can we then begin to look at the whole design process? Right. At which point does craft come into the design process in general? If we move craft and let's say hand production and the value of hands to the beginning or to the center of the design process instead of the end, when the project's out of money and we're looking at the FF&E budget, and we're saying, okay, now I just need a few things to decorate
Get
with.
some handmade
yeah,
looking stuff to put on the fireplace
we're never going to really have any kind of transformation, and the potential in placing craft at the center of the design process is that we can then alter the outcome. The outcome is more unknown, and we can have a broader effect on society at large, right?
Yeah, and craft is more, than the decoration and the output. It's all of the processes that came before, and the people, and the exchanges. And so craft for us, we see it as a social practice, and Stephen's work it attests to that too, showing that craft has this potential to solve problems and to engage communities and to speak about a place and to also potentially innovate as well.
I mean, traditionally speaking, there can be economic transformation through craft. And so if we are looking at the project scale and then the building scale and the urban scale, right, maybe we have to ask more from our architecture. Maybe a building can't just be built without having to give something back to the society.
Right.
And what is it that we're trying to give back, right?
Right.
That's the question.
What's the most effective mechanism to make that work? Do designers just need to say, look, this project has to have some element of craft, or however you want to talk about it? Are they the people who need to be pulling this lever and pushing it? Or does it need to be on the legal level? Like, how do we make this happen, I guess, on a practical level?
It definitely starts with the intention of the designer or the architect,
right.
For sure. But then they also have to kind of look at, it's a kind of retooling of the economic system as well, right? So we have a budget for this project. How do we go about this? Bringing in the community, bringing in the potential of making something unique. And we like to look at examples, historical examples. Antonio Gaudí in Barcelona, for example, right, where all of these aspects of the houses, the private houses he was building, were all made by hand, and it was about his vision and kind of wanting to kind of manifest that.
Right, right.
And we understand the designer. In Antonio Gaudí's example, he's more of an orchestrator. He understands the roles that the different craftsmen play, and he's including them in a composition that, in this case, is the physical building. But you could think of it in that parallel as like a musical composition.
Yeah, and you don't have to be that famous to do it. You can just try and invite more of it into a smaller project.
And of course, there are different scales, right?
Yeah.
And different scales of how you could begin to engage artisans and craftsmen in the production of a thing.
Right.
But I think it really starts with the architect's intention.
Right. No, it's a good point. And if more people want to do it, then it will get done more. I think it's
And we need to do it, I would say, too. I think craft also has, craft you could use it as a placeholder for culture, which is a placeholder for people. And in this time that we're all living in with the coronavirus, with issues of social justice and anti-racist work, you have to be thinking about people and the effect that the work we're doing is having on people.
Right, right. What do you guys feel, a lot of the times the people who have the money to pay for processes that are right now more expensive, are in the 1%. Sometimes craft feels like it's in the province of only very rich people, which is not bad. It's at least somebody is. Sure. But how can we get past that? Or is that okay? I mean, how do you guys feel about that?
I think there's a lot of examples of projects that were developed with communities, even in the low-income housing sector. I'm thinking of the Aranya housing project, for example, where the architect...
Balkrishna Doshi, the Pritzker Prize-winning architect in the 1980s, he designed an incremental housing project where he was just specifying the site and then providing basic services like plumbing, and the rest he provided in a kit of parts for the residents to actually personalize their own spaces.
So he just gave them like a
more,
set of materials,
giving them the tools, and they
Right.
expanded their houses as resources changed, as families grew.
And there are different levels of living within this community as well. Some people had very little resources and had very little space, but still were open to, his architecture was still open to them developing their own space in their way, and other people had more resources and more space. And so the way that those were developed were dependent on the individual.
And this speaks to something that Stephen's always said, which is everyone is capable of design. And I'm more of an academic person. I never thought, really I could work with my hands the way that Stephen does.
Right.
But last night I was building a prototype model out of Jenga pieces. And, you think of craft as this very inaccessible thing, but really we're all capable of it. And that's something that Stephen's work also has been trying to put forth.
I mean, I only learned that through my travels, right? So a lot of our reflection has to do with other cultures and other ways of making that still have so much to teach us. Right. That kind of immediacy of making and the way that communities come together to build a project. I'm thinking of Francis Kiri's work or Toshiko Mori's work with the Annie Albers Foundation at Thread. Yeah, or the schools that Francis Kiri has developed in Burkina Faso. And So there are you can almost think of it as parallel tracks, right? In terms of time, that there's progress happening in different places at different speeds in the world.
Right.
And so the way that we're operating isn't necessarily better than the way that they're operating.
Right.
And we can both learn from each other there.
Right. It's funny, you were talking about how last night you were making a jingle. I think I was like watching The Office last night. I feel a little bit guilty that I'm not working with my hands as much.
We feel guilty when we're not trying to do something like that. Right? Like, where do we find the time?
You have to make an effort.
Yeah,
You have to make an effort.
Yeah, craft is effort. It's
You
not.
have
It's
to
not
make- you have to
easy.
make
Yeah.
effort.
I'm curious. You guys have been, like the rest of us, sheltering in place during COVID, and you've been working on this project or this idea. It's funny because my COVID project has been to lose weight that I haven't lost. So once again, you're using your time a lot more efficiently than I am. But you've been thinking about how we can take this idea of a craft and move it beyond what we all think of as like a basket or a table or whatever, and like blow it up to the scale of a project or the scale of a house or a city.
Yeah.
Tell me about some. You were mentioning some examples of that, but like what kind of ideas inspire you guys along those lines?
Well, I think we're all coming back into terms with our domestic space, right?
Whether we like it or not.
Yeah, I was
Right.
when all of this struck. I was traveling twice a week, teaching up at Harvard, and Malika and I, even though we were living together, weren't spending that much time together. So it's kind of it's kind of been about getting to know getting to know your partner again,
Right,
getting to
yeah.
understand your space. So for us, our home sort of became a laboratory,
Right.
And we looked at opportunities to kind of create space for one another. So. There's something we're working on, which is, kind of private seat, let's say, where we're building a shell that becomes a kind of acoustic volume, so that
nice, yeah.
she
I'm
can sit,
having a phone call.
in the
very
living
cool,
room and be
yeah.
on the phone, and
That's the bathroom for me.
yeah. So there are ideas everywhere, and then
Yeah.
we sort of inherited a television with this apartment that we're in now, and I at
Said
one
so
point,
guiltily.
it was sort
Yeah.
of it was in the closet, then it was under the bed. I had no
Okay.
idea where it was, but we weren't watching television before,
Right,
and
okay.
all of a sudden I'm like, hey, we have a TV, let's get that out. So we pulled it out,
Mm-hmm.
but we wouldn't want to put a big black void on the wall because no offense to those that do, but
I do engage with the black void.
I'd
I'd
rather do something else with that void. So we actually going back to the idea of a television having a cabinet, right? We built our own sort of woven TV creature. And containing this flat screen, and so now it's got personality, and it's sort of become a member of the family. And,
What's its name, dare I ask?
we slide it around.
We call it the TV.
This kind of TV thing. Or,
Yeah.
The thing is, the stuff is so fun. It's interesting because, like, I think people think of craft and they're like, okay, I should be very serious, but it's very playful, and I think more designers need to, get into that side of it, for themselves and for their clients, the people they're working with.
Yeah.
It's not like always a super serious thing that we always have to be super serious
Well, but it's
about.
also about bringing a level of diversity to
Right.
the projects, and so I think we live in the most pluralistic time in history in terms of design, and we've moved beyond monocultural messaging in design, right? So
Right.
the modernism, in fact, we're witnessing the limits of the modernist project in a sense, especially when we think about sustainability, when we think about equality. Equity in America is a big, big problem, right? And so how can we use craft to begin to create these sort of interventions in the way that we live with one another, the way we engage our practice, the way we build? I mean, why should a building not be in a position of giving back?
Yeah, and if we think about craft as just a mentality, so it's a craft mentality that we apply to products, could we apply it to the building scale, like you were saying? I think it's about an open-ended way of thinking and not a closed way. And one of the problems that we have in the society is that closed way of thinking. And entering a project thinking that we know what the outcome is going to be. But the beauty of craft and play and being curious is that sometimes the outcomes are unknown, and it's in that process of trying to reach the end point that amazing things can emerge and more people can contribute.
No, I know, and the thing is that the challenge is always it's such a wonderful idea. I just think it just butts up against capitalism and people needing, wanting things. We had a presenter earlier today who was talking about how the world needs to be frictionless now. Like everything needs to happen quickly and efficiently. And I mean, she's very smart, and I understand why she's saying it. But if you're playing so much and crafting so much, and it takes more time, and you're uncertain of the results, that's how can we make that work within the system we have?
Well, in a sense, we have more time now, and I think
we do.
and I think it's about where we choose to apply value. We were just spending time with a friend of ours, Theaster Gates, in Chicago, and his artistic project is very much about taking things that weren't thought of as valuable, passing them through the kind of art world system, and then all of a sudden they have value. And through that value, he then gives them back to the community. I'm thinking of his archives around Johnson Publishing. I'm thinking about the bank building that he developed from the ground up, and now rather than a kind of financial repository, it's an artistic repository. And so if we look at artistic practice as a kind of inspiration, right? How do we begin to shift value and then value how the hands are kind of brought to these processes? The artist Ellen Atsui takes a whole community, recycles bottle caps that become tapestries that become, the highest valued artist of African descent at auction, for example. So I think that there are ways to think about how we use handicraft and really change that perception.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean it's something we kind of all have to do in little pieces, and hopefully it'll add up to something big.
Yeah. I mean, rather than, for example, specifying a material, there can be material research. I'm thinking about Olafur Eliasson's work. With the Fordenhus, right? It's an artistic project, but it's a building as well.
Right.
And so he's got something like 16 different bricks and
970,000 bricks in 16 different colors.
All glazed differently, and the assignment of those are done by computer, but the laying of those is done by hand. Right. I'm thinking about his material research around the Opera House in Reykjavik. For example, as well, right? So the glazing and how that form changes over the entire surface of the building, right? So there's a lot of ways, I think, if we consider the intention, that those projects aren't that different from what was happening at Angkor Wat centuries ago, for example.
Right. Yeah. No, well, it's you've given us a lot to think about, and we have a lot of crafting to do. I really appreciate your guys' time. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.